in death there is peace. There is no fear. But William Douglas didn't give in. He chose life, strength, and the thrill of swimming free. Hey there, curious minds. Welcome back to the Eloquent Explorers, your go-to English corner where every splash of a story leaves ripples in your heart. Today, we are diving headfirst into Deep Water by William Douglas, a gripping personal account of fear, survival, and triumph. Get ready to swim through a real-life story that turns panic into power and teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's learning how to face it. This chapter is a goldmine for CBSE Grade 12 with character insights and theme-based discussion, and aspirants preparing for PGT English with Douglas's autobiography style, tone analysis, and fear psychology. Here's what we'll explore: the Yakima River and YMCA pool incident, step-by-step overcoming of phobia, literary devices like imagery, irony, contrast, core themes fear versus determination, mind over matter, and various other aspects related to the chapter. My personal favorite chapter since grade 12th, and the quote has always stuck with me. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. So let's be courageous and let's triumph over this chapter. Without any delay, let's get right into it. Let us quickly take a glance on what we are going to study throughout in this video. First, we're going to get to know our author. Then, we're going to see the settings of the story. Introduction, detailed explanation in which we are going to read the chapter and then I will explain it to you in depth. Then we're going to take a quick recap wherein we will discuss the main events of this chapter. Then finally we are going to discuss the literary aspects of the chapter, which include the themes, the tone, mood, and the writing style of the story, literary devices, main characters, and the message that our author is trying to give us through this story. Let us now get to know our author. Our author, William O. Douglas, was born in Maine, Minnesota, which is in USA, United States of America. He graduated with Bachelor of Arts in English and Economics. Initially, he worked as a high school teacher in Yakima, Washington. He grew weary of teaching, that means he got tired of teaching, and then he pursued a law degree at Columbia Law School. He became a professor at Yale Law School where he met Franklin D. Roosevelt. He served as a close advisor and friend to President Roosevelt. He was appointed as a Justice of U.S. Supreme Court in 1939. He served for 36 years over there, becoming the longest-serving justice in U.S. Supreme Court history. He is known for his progressive views, environmental activism, strong advocacy for civil liberties and individual rights. He has authored several books, and the story Deep Water is an excerpt from his autobiography of Men and Mountains, written in 1951. This is a very important point, as if we keep in view the preparation for exams, as well as it can often be used to frame some answers that are related to this text. So please remember that Deep Water is an excerpt from the autobiography of William Douglas, title of which is Of Men and Mountains, and it was written in 1951. He often used personal experiences to discuss larger themes like fear, survival, and human willpower. Though not a Nobel laureate, he was highly respected for his legal, literary, and environmental contributions. Douglas's writing blends autobiographical narrative with philosophical insights, making it both personal and universal. As we read through this chapter, this point will be very evident because we will see that this story, a part of his autobiography, is going to show us his personal experiences, as well as it is so relatable that every person that it is that any person in this universe can relate to it. A simple yet very inspiring story it is. In Deep Water, he recounts a near drowning incident from his childhood and how he overcame the deep rooted fear of water, using it as a metaphor for conquering any fear in life. My apologies. All right. So, in Deep Water, we are going to see how he overcame the fear of water that was there in his heart since the beginning. Now, let's discuss the setting. The first setting is the YMCA pool in Yakima, Washington, and the secondary settings are the lakes and rivers of Washington, which are the natural settings. The time is early 20th century. That is around 1951 when he wrote, so before that, when he was a child. Now, let me quickly give you an introduction to this story. The story, as we have already discussed, is a recounting of a personal incident that William Douglas faced when he was a child. As a child, he was always afraid of water, and his mother also had a part to play in it because she kept telling him the stories about drowning. So he was really scared, and when he was a child, he actually faced two drowning incidents. One was with his father when they were when they were swimming in the Yakima river that is there, and the second incident is of the pool, the major incident which uh, made him fear water. And then the story gradually tells us how he overcame this fear. All right. So the story is about two of his personal life incidents, both revolving around drowning, and then how he managed to uh, come out of that fear of drowning and be able to swim freely and come out braver and stronger and courageous. So, without wasting another minute, let's now get into the detailed discussion of the story. Deep water. It happened when I was 10 or 11 years old. I had decided to learn to swim. There was a pool at the YMCA in Yakima that offered exactly the opportunity. The Yakima River was treacherous. Mother continually warned against it and kept fresh in my mind the details of each drowning in the river. But the YMCA pool was safe. It was only 2 or 3 feet deep at the shallow end, and while it was 9 feet deep at the other, the drop was gradual. I got a pair of water wings and went to the pool. I hated to walk naked into it and show my skinny legs, but I subdued my pride and did it. Now, author begins from the time when he was 10 or 11 years old and he had finally decided that he was going to learn to swim. Again, I over here is our author. All right, he is our author, William. Okay, and it is his personal life story. Now, there was this pool at the YMCA in Yakima. Yakima is a place, and which offered him the exact opportunity that he needed, which was to learn to swim. Now, Yakima River was treacherous. Treacherous means that it was very dangerous, and his mother kept on telling him about this. She kept on warning him about this, and she wouldn't let him forget that Yakima River was very dangerous. She kept telling him stories of all the drownings that happened in the river. Uh, she maybe was trying to keep him safe. However, this actually was the first step that put the fear of water in him. Okay, but he explained to himself that YMCA pool wasn't dangerous. It was supposed to be safe because at the shallow end, the smaller end, the less deeper end, it was only 2 to 3 feet deep, and even at the most deep end, it was only 9 feet, and that from 2 to 3 feet to 9 feet, it was a very gradual fall. It was a very gradual drop. Okay, so it wasn't dangerous. It was not like jumping right into the river. Okay, so he did not let his mother's words affect him and decided that he is going to go forward with his learning to swim and got a pair of water wings. He went to the pool. Water wings are supportive wings, rubbery wings that children wear on their arms, so that they can stay afloat. Okay, so that they can, because they are learners, so they are supposed to stay above the water, and that helps them to learn to swim and float on water. Okay, so he went to the pool over there. Now he says that he hated to walk naked. Now, boys generally learn to swim only in their shorts. So, that is what he is recounting, that he did not like to walk naked because he had skinny legs. He had very thin legs and he did not like to show them. But he controlled his emotion, his pride, and he walked to the pool in his shorts. From the beginning, however, I had an aversion to the water when I was in it. This started when I was 3 or 4 years old, and father took me to the beach in California. He and I stood in the surf. I hung on to him, yet the waves knocked me down and swept me over me. I was buried in water. My breath was gone. I was frightened. Father laughed, but there was terror in my heart at the overpowering force of the waves. Now, he recounts another incident, uh, an incident previous to this one, when he was just a 3 or 4 year old child, and they were at the beach in California. His father had taken him there. He says that already had an aversion to the water. He already did not like being in the water because of this incident. When he was 3 to 4 years old, what happened was that he and his father were together. They were standing in the surf and surfboard. They were trying to surf, and even though he tried to catch him, he tried to hang on to him, and he was not willing to let him go. The waves were so strong that they knocked him over. They knocked him down, and he fell into the water. Now, he was buried into water, he couldn't breathe, he was frightened, but his father laughed. And that incident gave him the terror. That incident started, or you can say that incident planted the seed of fear of water in his heart. Because he was scared of the overpowering force, of the very strong force of the waves that did not let him stay latched on to his father, that did not let him stay close to his father and instead knocked him down. Okay, so he was really scared of this, of staying in water. My introduction to the YMCA pool revived unpleasant memories and stirred childish fears. But in a little while I gathered confidence. I paddled with my new water wings, watching the other boys and trying to learn by aping them. I did this 2 or 3 times on different days and was just beginning to feel at ease in the water when the misadventure happened. Now, so far, he has just begun to learn to swim, and right when in the beginning, when he was just trying to get the hang of staying in water, he is reminded of all that terrible memory of him falling off the surf with while he was there with his father in California, and how he had felt, the terror he had felt when he had been knocked down and the waves had swept over him, showing him the power of water, which was way more than what he could have uh, accept. Okay, so this coming into the pool, the introduction into the pool brought back those memories. But after a little while, he gathered his courage, he gathered his confidence, and with his new water wings, he paddled. He started learning to swim. He would watch the other boys and try to learn by copying them. However, he was very unsuccessful at that, but he still tried. And he tried 2 to 3 times on different days. Now he was finally beginning to feel at ease. He was finally getting to understand how to learn to swim, how to stay afloat, how to paddle, how to use the water wings when this incident happened. I had not been there long when in came a big bruiser of a boy, probably 18 years old. He had thick hair on his chest. He was a beautiful physical specimen, with legs and arms that showed rippling muscles. He yelled, "Hi, Skinny! How'd you like to be ducked?" With that, he picked me up and tossed me into the deep end. I landed in a sitting position, swallowed water, and went at once to the bottom. I was frightened, but not yet frightened out of my wits. On the way down, I planned. When my feet hit the bottom, I would make a big jump, come to the surface, lie flat on it, and paddle to the edge of the pool. Now, one day, he recounts that he had not been there at the pool for a very long time. He had just arrived at the pool when there came a big bully of a boy. Okay, he was bruiser is the term used to describe a large, strong, and aggressive man. Okay, so here this boy is a bully. Okay, so this big bully came in here. He was probably 18 years old, and Douglas describes that he had thick hair on his chest. He was ripped. He had good rippling muscles and legs and arms. And he describes him as a beautiful physical specimen. When this bully came in, he yells at Douglas, calling him Skinny, and asking him if how he'd like to be dug. Dug means to be pushed into water. All right. So without waiting for any answer, this big bully then picks Douglas up and tosses him. That means throws him into the deeper end. That was 9 feet deep. Now Douglas was just learning. He already had an aversion to water. He was already averted to water. He was scared because he already had a near drown. He had already experienced a near drowning incident at when he was 3, 4 years old. Now this big bully came in and threw him at the deeper end. But Douglas was not yet scared out of his wits. He still had enough courage to think, to try to come up with a plan to save himself. Now, when the bully threw him into the water, he landed into the water in the sitting position. He was not ready for this, so he swallowed some of the water, and of course, he was frightened, but not that frightened. He started drowning. But he came with a plan. On the way down, he came up with the plan that when as soon because he was in sitting down position, he plans that as soon as his feet hit the bottom, he would jump. He would take support of the bottom of the pool, the tiles on the bottom of the pool, and he would make a big jump. With that jump, with that force of the jump, he will be able to come back to the surface where he will lie flat on the surface and like a dead body, he's going to try to lie flat on the surface of the water so that he can take help of the buoyancy and he can float and paddle towards the edge. So that was his plan. It seemed a long way down. Those 9 feet were more like 90. and before I touched the bottom, my lungs were ready to burst. But when my feet hit bottom, I summoned all my strength and made what I thought was a great spring upwards. I imagined I would bob to the surface like a cork. Instead, I came up slowly. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but water. Water that had a dirty yellow tinge to it. I grew panicky. I reached up as if to grab a rope, and my hands clutched only at water. I was suffocating. I tried to yell, but no sound came out. Then my eyes and nose came out of the water, but not my mouth. Now, he was just a little boy, and 9 feet is very deep for just a boy of 10, 11 years old. Okay? Now, so he feels that it was a long way down. Those 90 feet felt like 90 to him, and before he could reach the bottom, his tiny lungs he couldn't hold his breath. His tiny lungs couldn't take it anymore. He was not habitual to holding his breath for that long. But however, as soon as his feet hit the bottom, he called upon all his strength, he summoned all his strength, he gathered all his strength and tried to take a great jump upwards. What he thought was a great jump, which actually wasn't. And then he imagined that he would bob to the surface like a cork. He would come up to the surface like a cork. If you've seen cork in water, the corks are wooden pieces that are used to uh, hold the bottles tight, shut the bottles tight. Specifically on wine bottles, you will see that wine and alcoholic drinks, the bottles there, you will see corks there. Those corks, because they're made of wood, they don't drown. Okay, they have holes, and so they don't drown. So he thought that he would come up to the surface like a cork, and he would be able to then swim to the edge. But he came up slowly. He couldn't gather as much strength. He was just a little boy, so he couldn't gather as much strength, and he came up very slowly. When he opened his eyes, he could see nothing but water. That means he was still in water and his plan had failed. The water had a dirty yellow tinge to it. Tinge is a small amount of coloring, so he could see that the water was a little yellowish. It was dirty water. Now he grew very scared because his plan had failed. He tried to reach up to grab something, to grab a rope. He tried to use his arms to try to grab a rope, something to pull him up. But nothing came to him. All he could do was clutch water. He was suffocating. His lungs were giving out. He couldn't breathe anymore. He tried to shout, he tried to yell, but no sound came out. He couldn't because he was still in water. And then his eyes and nose came out a little bit, but not his mouth. He couldn't come out as much as he needed to, and only his nose and his eyes came out. And then he started drowning again. I flailed at the surface of the water, swallowed and choked. I tried to bring my legs up, but they hung as dead weights, paralyzed and rigid. A great force was pulling me under. I screamed, but only the water heard me. I had started on the long journey back to the bottom of the pool. Now he tried to move, he tried to wave his hands, and but then he couldn't because the water's force was more than what he could take. And so he just flailed his hands and he just tried to wave his hands and his whole body, but nothing happened. All that was happening was that he was swallowing more and more water and choking because of it, because he couldn't breathe. Now he tried to bring his legs up, but they wouldn't come out. They were in the water and they felt like dead weights, like very heavy weights that wouldn't just come out. They were paralyzed and rigid. He felt like there was a great force that was pulling him under. He tried to scream, but only the water heard him because sound cannot travel through water. And then he had started going back to the bottom of the pool again. I struck at the water as I went down, expending my strength as one in a nightmare fights an irresistible force. So he is now explaining the experience of drowning. Okay, again, he is trying. At first, yes, he was drowning, but he was not that scared. He had a plan, he had come up with a plan, and he was still aware of what to do. Now, when he tried to execute that plan, it failed miserably, and he couldn't come out of the water enough to at least breathe in enough air for him to pull himself up. Okay? His plan failed, and he tried to grab onto something, anything that could pull him out, like a rope, but that failed again, and nothing came into his hands solid enough to bring him up. So he felt like his legs were paralyzed and rigid and they would just not come out. He flailed, he tried to move his hands, but the water's force made him, the water's force took over. Okay? He could not do anything, and he started the journey towards the bottom of the pool once again. He felt like there was a great force that was pulling. Now you see that there is such great and rich imagery in these paragraphs that you can actually imagine a child going being thrown into the water, going down, trying to come up, trying to spring up, failing miserably, trying to grab onto something for life and failing again, and then coming back down very slowly. Now he compares the uh, experience of drowning as the experience of a nightmare when you're trying to fight something with that has an irresistible force that is very strong. Sometimes when you get nightmares in which you're trying to fight away some force that you cannot resist, something that is trying to push you, trying to you can say trying to make you out of breath, trying to choke you, and you're trying to fight that irresistible force, that force that is so great you're not able to fight it, but you're still trying. So this is what he was experiencing while he was drowning. I had lost all my breath, my lungs ached, my head throbbed, I was getting dizzy, but I remembered the strategy. I would spring from the bottom of the pool and come like a cork to the surface. I would lie flat on the water, strike out with my arms, and thrash with my legs. Then I would get to the edge of the pool and be safe. Now, when he was continuing on his journey the second time, he explains that he had lost all his breath. He was already exhausted. His lungs were aching because he couldn't breathe in any more air, and if he tried to breathe in, all he would get was water. His head was hurting because of the exertion and the exhaustion. Of course, he was getting dizzy because of the same reason, but then he was still not so out yet. Okay? He again remembered his strategy that as soon as his feet touched the bottom of the pool, he would spring up and he would come like a cork to the surface. Then again, he would lie flat on the water, and with his arms, he would swim, he would strike and thrash his legs, and then get to the edge of the pool and be safe. Now he went down, down, endlessly. I opened my eyes. Nothing but water with a yellow glow. Dark water that one could not see through. And then sheer stark terror seized me. Terror that knows no understanding. Terror that knows no control. Terror that no one can understand who has not experienced it. I was shrieking underwater. I was paralyzed underwater, stiff, rigid with fear. Even the screams in my throat were frozen. Only my heart and the pounding in my head said that I was still alive. And then, in the midst of the terror, came a touch of reason. I must remember to jump when I hit the bottom. At last, I felt the tiles under me. My toes reached out as if to grab them. I jumped with everything I had. Now, he says he's describing the second time when he's drowning. He says that again he went down and down endlessly because again it's still 9 feet deep, so it's very deep for that little child. And when he opened his eyes, there was nothing but water, and water had a sort of yellowish glow to it. It was dark water, and he could not see anything. And then the terror, the sharp terror, it got control of our author's mind. The terror that is so dangerous that it does not understand. It does not understand that the person feeling the terror is. It does not know any control. It only knows how to scare you, how to make you feel out of control. That nobody, such a terror he was feeling that nobody can feel if you haven't experienced the same situation, if you haven't felt that that you're drowning and there is no escape. Now he explains that he felt paralyzed underwater. His limbs were giving out. He could not breathe. He was choking. His body was stiff. It was rigid. It would not move because of the fear. Also because of the fear. Okay. He tried to scream, but the scream would not come out of his throat. Only that he could hear his heart beating, and there was a pounding in his head. There was a continuous, you can say, throbbing, beating in his head. When you have a severe headache, you can feel like somebody is hitting your head, okay, over and over again, continuously. So that is pounding, that is throbbing, okay. Now he says that he explains that just this beating of his heart and the pounding, the throbbing of his head were the signals telling him that he was alive. Otherwise, no part of his body was moving. And then, finally, he realizes, in the midst of this terror, in the midst of this paralyzing terror, he realizes that he must not forget to jump. So, when he finally felt the tiles under his feet, his legs moved, his toes moved as if trying to grab those tiles. And then he again jumped with every little breath that he had left, with every little strength that he had left. But the jump made no difference. The water was still around me. I looked for ropes, ladders, water wings. Nothing but water. A mass of yellow water held me. Stark terror took an even deeper hold on me, like a great charge of electricity. I shook and trembled with fright. My arms wouldn't move. My legs wouldn't move. I tried to call for help, to call for mother. Nothing happened. And then, strangely, there was light. I was coming out of the awful yellow water. At least my eyes were. My nose was almost out too. Then I started down a third time. I sucked for air and got water. The yellowish light was going out. Now, he had very little strength left in him, so the jump made not much difference. He was still submerged in water, and there was water all around him. He tried to look for ropes, he tried to look for ladders. Remember, he's in a pool, so pools have ladders and ropes. And even there could have been a water wing afloat from somebody who had left it in the pool, or maybe somebody who had seen him drowning and thrown it to help him out. But there was nothing. He couldn't grab anything, he couldn't catch hold of anything, he could not see anything. Only water. There was nothing that would help him get out. This huge mass of yellow water held him. The water wouldn't let him out. Now the fear that he had experienced in the previous two drownings, it became worse. It got even deeper. It was like a great charge of electricity that had caught him. He was not able to move. He was shaking. He was trembling in fear. But he couldn't do anything. His body was frozen. His arms, his legs, they wouldn't move. He tried to shout for help. He tried to call for help. He tried to call anybody, somebody, his mother. But nothing happened. And then, strangely, he could see light. He was coming out of that water. He was coming up from the water. At least his eyes were. And his nose was almost out too. Again, like the previous time, only his eyes and his nose came out. And then he started his journey towards the end, towards the deeper end, towards the bottom of the pool yet again. He tried to suck for air, he tried to breathe, but all he got was water. And now even the yellowish light was going out. Then all effort ceased. I relaxed. Even my legs felt limp, and a blackness swept over my brain. It wiped out fear. It wiped out terror. There was no more panic. It was quiet and peaceful. Nothing to be afraid of. This is nice. To be drowsy. To go to sleep. No need to jump. Too tired to jump. It's nice to be carried gently. To float along in space. Tender arms around me. Tender arms like mother's. Now I must go to sleep. I crossed to oblivion, and the curtain of life fell. Now in this paragraph, our author explains death, the experience of death. The third time when he was going down, he was so exhausted, he had choked, he had taken in so much water that he could not breathe anymore, and he gave up. He finally gave up. His legs, his arms, everything felt limp. Everything felt weak. He stopped all his effort. And a kind of a blackness came over his brain. That blackness was nice. That darkness was nice for him. Because it wiped out, it cleared out all the fear, it cleared out all the terror. He was not afraid anymore. He was not panicking anymore. He was not trembling or shaking anymore. This was nice. This was quiet, peaceful. There was nothing to be afraid of anymore. He felt like he was going to sleep. He was falling asleep. He was too exhausted to jump, and now there was no need to jump. He felt nice to be carried gently, to float along in space. He felt like there was some soft, tender arms around him. Arms like he was with his mother. His mother's arms wrapped around him. He was feeling at peace finally after struggling so much. And he realizes that now is the time to go to sleep. And then he crossed to oblivion. He became unconscious. And Douglas tells us that's where the curtain of life fell. Now this phrase, the curtain of life fell, is a very important phrase, and phrases like these I have explained on my WhatsApp channel, the links to which will be added in the description, so you can go and check it out at the channel that is for CBSE, and for it is by the name CBSE the Eloquent Explorers, And over there, I share a lot of details about chapters, various literature chapters. And for deep water, I have also explained this phrase, which symbolizes death. Okay, curtain of life fell here actually is a symbol for death. It's a very important phrase, and um, it can be asked in exams, whether it is um, exams for PGT level or even in grade 12th exams, it can be asked to explain the phrase the curtain of life fell. So this phrase symbolizes death. This phrase has been used to symbolize death. Now our author is so exhausted from trying to put in an effort to save himself that he has lost all his will to live. He has lost all his strength, and he is so exhausted that he has now finally given in to the force of water. And now, wherever the water is taking him, he is going with it like he does not care. He is unconscious and he is exhausted, and is experiencing death now. Okay? The next I remember, I was lying on my stomach beside the pool, vomiting. The chap that threw me in was saying, "But I was only fooling." Someone said, "The kid nearly died. Be all right now. Let's carry him to the locker room." Our author was saved. While he was unconscious, somebody must have jumped into the pool, probably the big bully or probably somebody else, maybe the lifeguard. He or she saved this little boy, brought him up to the edge of the pool, brought him up to the pool where they laid him on his stomach so that they could pump out the water that had gotten into his lungs. And this is what he next remembers. After remembering, after experiencing the peace of death, after experiencing the peacefulness that is in death, when he gave up, when he was unconscious, the next thing he remembers is waking up beside the pool. Somebody had taken him out of the pool and he was vomiting water. He was extra water was being taken out of him and he was being given the first aid. That is where he becomes conscious. While his consciousness was returning, he could hear things like this big bully just explaining that he was just only fooling around. It was just a prank to him. To which somebody replied, the author does not know whom, somebody replied that author had nearly died. He had almost drowned and died in that pool, and this was not a prank. And then this bully was asked to go, and then they were carrying him to the locker room where they could change him and give him some rest. Several hours later, I walked home. I was weak and trembling. I shook and cried when I lay on my bed. I couldn't eat that night. For days, a haunting fear was in my heart. The slightest exertion upset me, making me wobbly in the knees and sick to my stomach. I never went back to the pool. I feared water. I avoided it whenever I could. A few years later, when I came to know the waters of the Cascades, I wanted to get into them. And whenever I did, whether I was wading the Titan or bumping river or bathing in warm lake of the goat rocks, the terror that had seized me in the pool would come back. It would take possession of me completely. My legs would become paralyzed. Icy horror would grab my heart. Now, as the little boy, several hours later, he was fine enough to go back home. So he walked home. However, he was very weak and he was so scared that he was trembling. He shook and he cried when he lay on his bed. And he couldn't eat anything. He was so exhausted and he was so scared of this near death experience that he could not eat anything that night. And for days that followed, he had this haunting fear in his heart. He was so scared. This trauma of drowning had housed itself in his heart very deeply. Even the slightest of exertion of putting in any effort made him wobbly, made him made his knees shake, made him weak in his knees and sick to his stomach. He would start vomiting. He could not take any exertion. This trauma was so serious for him. So you see, children, how a prank for somebody could be such taxing on somebody else's life. Such a trauma that this little child had to go through because somebody thought that it was funny to throw a child who was just learning to swim, to throw him into water, to play a prank on him. So this trauma had housed in Douglas's heart very deeply. He never went back to the pool after that, and he this trauma had led him to fear water even more than he had before. He avoided water whenever he could, and few years later he came to know the waters of the Cascades. He wanted to get into those waters. He wanted to enjoy swimming. He wanted to enjoy wading. He wanted to enjoy bathing. So he says that whenever he got into the water, whether he was wading in Titan or pumping river or bathing in the warm lake of the Goat Rocks, that terror that had caught him, that had seized him in the pool, that terror that made him unconscious, that made that while he was fighting for life, the terror that set in his heart would come back and it would paralyze him. He would again get stuck in that same situation, even though the waters were not scary at that time when he was a grown up. But that trauma had uh, stuck in his heart and in his mind so deeply, it had deep rooted itself that even in the calm waters, he could not stay. He could not enjoy. And his legs would become paralyzed, and this icy horror would grab his heart. This handicap stayed with me as the years rolled by. In canoes on lakes, fishing for landlocked salmon, bass fishing in New Hampshire, trout fishing on the Deschutes and Metolius in Oregon, fishing for salmon on the Columbia, at Bumping Lake in the Cascades. Wherever I went, the haunting fear of the water followed me. It ruined my fishing trips and deprived me of the joy of canoeing, boating, and swimming. Now, our author explains that what this trauma had caused him. He would get so scared of water that even in the still waters, even in the landlocked areas where there were waters to catch fish, he wouldn't. Okay, he wouldn't be able to because that would make him feel that would bring back all those bad memories of the childhood, and he would get paralyzed. He was traumatized, and for very long time this trauma stuck with him. Whenever he went fishing for different fish like salmon, trouts, and other kinds of fishes, it ruined his fishing trips for him, and it deprived him. It took away the joy of canoeing, boating, and swimming from him. I used every way I knew to overcome this fear, but it held me firmly in its grip. Finally, one October, I decided to get an instructor and learn to swim. I went to a pool and practiced 5 days a week, an hour each. The instructor put a belt around me. A rope attached to the belt went through a pulley that ran on an overhead cable. He held on to to the end of the rope, and we went back and forth across the pool, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. On each trip across the pool, a bit of the panic seized me. Each time the instructor relaxed his hold on the rope and I went under, some of the old terror returned and my legs froze. It was 3 months before the tension began to slack. Then he taught me to put my face underwater and exhale, and to raise my nose and inhale. I repeated the exercise hundreds of times. Bit by bit, I shed part of the panic that seized me when my head went under water. Now, from this paragraph onwards, we are going to see Douglas's journey of revival. Okay, of how he overcomes his trauma, overcomes his fear of water, and emerges into a courageous man who can swim freely, who can climb mountains and go wherever he wants to without getting paralyzed by this childhood fear. Okay, so how he first tried to overcome the fear on its own, but uh, he failed over and over again. So finally, one day in October, he decided that he would get an instructor. Okay, and he would learn to swim. He would start from the scratch, start from the very beginning. Now, for that, he went to the pool and he would practice 5 days a week, 1 hour every week. Okay, he explains that the instructor put the belt around him and there was a rope attached to this belt. Okay, so let's say this is Douglas, and there would be a belt around him, and this belt would be attached to a rope, which was then attached to a pulley. Okay, so there was this rope, and then there was another end of the rope, which let's say this instructor is over here. So this instructor would hold it. Okay, for the first few weeks, months, what he would do would be that he would be above water and he would be floating above water, and then the instructor would lower down the rope. He would let the rope loosen a bit. He would lower it down, and this is how Douglas would be made acquainted to water again. Okay, very gradually, very slowly. So Douglas explains that first few times when he would touch the water, and at that time again this fear of water overcame him, and his legs would freeze again. But then this exercise, continuing this exercise over and over again for 3 months, helped this tension to become less, to loosen around him. Okay, so this fear of water that had held him so tightly, it gradually started dissipating, it gradually started loosening its hold on the author. All right, now then after this, when he familiarized himself with water, when he was a little comfortable staying in water, then after that the instructor explained to him how to breathe underwater and how to breathe over water. So underwater, he would ask him to exhale, and when he would come up, when his nose would come up, he would ask him to inhale. Okay. Now Douglas repeated this exercise hundreds of times, and when he practiced over and over again, this panic that had caught him, that had held on to him, that had seized him so tightly, that started to shed, that started to leave our author when he put his head down under water. I hope this much is clear. Next, he held me at the side of the pool and had me kick with my legs. For weeks, I did just that. At first, my legs refused to work, but they gradually relaxed, and finally, I could command them. Now, before I explain this, I would just like to reiterate that if you have any problems up till here, or even during the next part of the story of this video, please feel free to ask your queries in the comments. I will answer them for sure. And again, let me remind you that if you want notes for these particular chapters, you can note them down from the video itself, or you can join my channel on WhatsApp. There are three different channels on WhatsApp. The CBSE Eloquent Explorers is the one where you can get all the notes, And for practice of MCQs, there is this channel for KVS AWES practice where I post regular quizzes. So you can join both these channels or either of these channels. And if you're preparing for exams for DSSSB and other higher level exams, then you can join my third channel, which is targeting PGT for DSSSB, NVS, and various other similar exams. Over there as well, I post one quiz a day, and which will give you help you with practicing for your exams. And then after around 24 hours, I post the answer as well as an insight so that you can revise through that channel. Now, moving forward, then he explains that after he was done practicing breathing and familiarizing himself with water, he finally, with the instructor's help, he started learning to kick with his legs in the water. For a few weeks, he just did that. He just kicked the water. He put his instructor would hold him close to the edge of the pool. And only he would use his legs in the water because his legs would be the first thing to get paralyzed when the fear of water struck. So, and even still, when he started, this fear struck and his legs got paralyzed. But then gradually, he was able to relax. He was able to get acquainted with water. He was able to get comfortable in water. And he was able to finally command his legs. He was to move, to kick underwater. Okay? Thus, piece by piece, he built a swimmer. And when he had perfected each piece, he put them together into an integrated whole. Now, he says that he's talking about his instructor, that piece by piece, with little exercises, smaller exercises, and doing them over and over again, hundreds and hundreds of times. By the by that, this instructor built a swimmer. Okay, here Douglas is talking about his instructor, and he says that that instructor helped Douglas become a swimmer by making him practice smaller pieces hundreds and hundreds of times and helping him perfect each technique, each piece, like just kicking underwater or just breathing underwater, smaller pieces, smaller fragments. He practiced them, and then finally, when he had perfected each fragment, he combined all of them together and he built a swimmer. He built this You can imagine this like a jigsaw puzzle where you have a perfect piece, and when you piece it together it becomes a bigger picture. Okay, so similarly this instructor helped our author learn to swim and and move on from his trauma, from his fear, bit by bit, piece by piece, slowly, gradually learning the same thing over and over again. In April he said, "Now you can swim. Dive off and swim the length of the pool. Crawl stroke." I did. The instructor was finished. So in April, he started in October, and in after around 8 months of rigorous practice of perfecting each piece of swimming, his instructor finally tells him that Douglas can now swim. Okay, he instructs him to dive into the water and swim the length of the pool, to crawl and stroke. Okay, to crawl stroke. All right. And Douglas was able to do that. Now, with this, the work of the instructor was finished. He had created a swimmer, but Douglas says that he wasn't finished, but I was not finished. I still wondered if I would be terror stricken when I was alone in the pool. I tried it. I swam the length up and down. Tiny vestiges of old terror would return. But now I could frown and say to that terror, "Trying to scare me, eh? Well, here's to you. Look." And off I'd go for another length of the pool. Now, Douglas says that even though the work of the instructor was finished, he had taken out most of the trauma, most of the fear from Douglas's heart, and he had made him into a swimmer. Douglas feels that he was not yet finished, that his work was still left. And he still wondered that if he had to swim into the pool again, would he be able to do it? Would that terror come back? So he did. He tried it. He tried to swim the length up and down, the length of the pool up and down. Little vestiges, tiny vestiges, you can say tiny remnants of that fear would come, but they were not as strong as to paralyze, as to terrorize Douglas. Okay? So he says that now he could frown and say to that terror that trying to scare me, huh? Well, here's to you. So he would actually face his terror and he would then overcome it. He was able to now overcome his terror on his own without any help. And then he would swim another length of the pool. This went on until July. So for around 3 more months, he um, kept practicing swimming in the pool, the length of the pool. But I was still not satisfied. I was not sure that all the terror had left. So I went to Lake Wentworth in North Hampshire, dived off a dock at Triggs Island, and swam 2 miles across the lakes to Stamp Act Island. I swam the crawl, breaststroke, side stroke, and backstroke. Only once did the terror return. When I was in the middle of the lake, I put my face under and saw nothing but bottomless water. The old sensation returned in miniature. I laughed and said, "Well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me?" It fled, and I swam on. Now, this practice of swimming the length of the pool went on till July, but Douglas was not still satisfied. He's not sure yet that all the terror that had seized him had left. So, to try it out and to force the left remaining terror away, he went to Lake Wentworth. Okay, he dived off the dock at Triggs Island and then he swam for 2 miles across this lake to Stamp Act Island. Okay, so he swam from Triggs Island to Stamp Act Island. All right, there he tried different strokes like the crawl stroke, the breaststroke, the side stroke, and the backstroke. Okay, through this entire swimming session, there was only once when the terror returned. When he was in the middle of this lake and he put his face under water, he saw nothing but bottomless water. That was when this old sensation of fear came back to him in a very smaller version, in a very miniature version, not enough to scare him. Okay, so he says that he laughed at that terror. Okay, calls it Mr. Terror. So here it is. Uh, he is personifying terror, and okay, so he says that he talks to terror and tells him what can it do to him. Okay, so he is now facing his fears head on, and he's not scared of it anymore. The fear fled and he swam on. He was able to complete his 2 miles without any mishappening, without any fear, without the trauma and the fear coming back. Okay. Yet I had residual doubts. Now you see that even now, still, he's not satisfied. He's trying to challenge himself more and more so that he can improve himself and whatever terror he may have in his heart, he is trying to just finish it off. He's trying to face his fears and he's trying to overcome his fears uh, in great depth. Okay, he's trying to take out even the deepest seeds that could be there of the fear that had caught him. At my first opportunity, I hurried west, went up the Titan to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek Trail to Mead Glacier, and camped in the high meadow by the side of Warm Lake. The next morning, I stripped, dived into the lake, and swam across to the other shore and back, just as Doug Corcoran used to do. I shouted with joy, and Gilbert Peak returned the echo. I had conquered my fear of water. Now, he still had some doubts, remaining doubts, that whether he was completely free of this fear or not. So to check that out, he went towards west to Titan, to the Conrad Meadows, and then up the Conrad Creek Trail. So he went up there to Mead Glacier. He camped over there at the high side of the meadow, okay, by the side of the warm lake. And then next morning, he took off his clothes and dived into the lake. He swam across the shore and back. He swam across to the other shore and back. So he was finally able to swim even in deeper waters, even from a higher level, and even in deeper waters, dangerous waters, he was able to swim, just as Doug Corcoran would do. Okay, he was finally satisfied that his fear of water had left, and he shouted out with joy, only to hear his echo being returned by the Gilbert Peak. Okay, he was so ecstatic, he was so happy that he had conquered his fear of water. He had finally overcome the trauma. He had finally overcome the fear that had deep rooted itself in his heart. The experience had a deep meaning for me, as only those who have known stark terror and conquered it can appreciate. In death, there is peace. There is terror only in the fear of death, as Roosevelt knew when he said, "All we have to fear is fear itself." Because I had experienced both the sensation of dying and the terror that fear of it can produce. The will to live somehow grew in intensity. At last I felt released, free to walk the trails and climb the peaks and brush aside fear. Now he finally concludes by saying that this experience, this whole experience of drowning twice, facing death, facing the fear that led to death, that came before death, and then overcoming that fear, this whole journey, this whole process was, uh, it held a very deep meaning to him. That only those who have actually felt that extreme terror, that unpleasant terror, and have conquered it can experience. Okay? And then he says that uh, Franklin D. Roosevelt, has rightly said, he knew it when he said that all we have to fear is fear itself. That there is fear of death. Okay? There is terror only in the fear of death. Death itself is peaceful, as we saw that finally when he was drowning for the third time, he felt peaceful. It were only the first two times when he was afraid of dying that he felt all sorts of terror and trauma come to him. But then he also realizes that when you overcome this fear of death, and that when you have experienced near death, the will to live, it grows. It makes you want to live, and it becomes stronger. Okay? So finally, when he had overcome his fear, overcome his trauma, he says that at last he felt released. He felt free. Free to walk the trails, free to climb the peaks, and free to brush aside the fear. He was free to do whatever he wanted and however he wanted. He was not afraid anymore, and there was nothing that could terrorize him anymore. So here we come to the end of this beautiful story, beautiful life experience as shared by William Douglas. And with this story, we actually have so much to learn. And the biggest thing that we can learn is that if we wish to try something, we should not be afraid. We should, of course, fear is going to be there. Always, when you try something new, fear is going to be there. Or if you're trying to overcome some previous traumas, fear is definitely going to be there. But you are stronger than fear. Your will to live is stronger than any fear that can get to you. Okay? So through William Douglas's experience, we understand that we can conquer anything in this world if we put our minds to it, if we put our will to it. Alright? Now let's discuss the second aspect. Let's move on to the second part of this video, in which we discuss the literary aspects that are related to this story. Before that, let's take a quick recap of the important events that we saw in this story. First is that the story begins when William Douglas recalls his childhood fear of water. Then the story in depth discusses the misadventure at YMCA pool. A big boy pushes him into the deep end. He experiences sheer panic, nearly drowns, and develops a lifelong fear of water. Later, he hires an instructor. See, this point reminds me to tell you that if you need help, feel free to ask, because sometimes that can actually give you the proper guidance, the proper person, some other person, maybe someone who's more experienced in that area, or maybe an elder, can actually help you overcome your fears, overcome uh, the, the terror that you might be feeling. So later he hires an instructor to overcome his fear. Through gradual training, he learns swimming and defeats his fear. Douglas finally conquers the terror during a solo trip to a lake. So these are the important events, and a quick recap of those important events that we read in the story. Now themes. First is overcoming fear, discussed at length. Okay, how throughout the story we saw Douglas overcome. First, we saw how he experienced the fear. We were able to connect with that fear. We were able to resonate with that fear. And then how we also experienced his journey as to how he overcame his fear, teaching us that nothing is impossible and every fear can be overcome. Then we see his courage and perseverance when he did not give up and he learned how to swim. Human willpower, you can see how his sheer willpower helped him overcome his fear, overcome his trauma. Personal growth, from the boy who feared water to the man who went to the lake and swam across it all on his own. From a person who had that near death experience, whose heart was filled with trauma from that child, to a man who was able to conquer his fears. We see personal growth of our author. Survival instinct, when our author was pushed into the water, we saw how he was able to come up with a plan to survive. Even though it failed, he did have survival instincts. So that is another theme which we saw in the story. And finally, mind versus body conflict. Here we saw that if we are able to, that there is always this mind and body conflict, that mind will keep telling you that something is impossible, something is scary, and then the body reacts to it. Okay. But then if you put your mind to something, if you put your mind, if you finally decide that you're not going to stay afraid of something, you're not going to stay terrorized of something, even though initially the body refuses to, you can say, agree with the mind, it gradually does. So we saw mind versus body conflict here as well, and then how mind and body come in a tandem, work in a tandem, work together to overcome whatever the fear and the traumas are. Okay, so these are the main themes that have been discussed in the story. Finally, let's discuss the tone, mood, and style of writing. The tone here is reflective and serious. It transitions. First, it is reflective, then serious, and then it transitions. It moves to inspirational as fear is conquered. So we begin with the serious tone where this Douglas drowns. We saw how reflective Douglas was when he was recounting his previous drowning incident of when he was 3 or 4 years old, his mother telling him about the dangers of water, from that reflection to the seriousness of drowning, and then when it changes into inspirational. This is the tone of our story. Mood here starts with fear, panic, and helplessness, and then it evolves into hope, determination, and finally triumph, finally victory. Style of writing is autobiographical, narrative, descriptive with vivid sensory details. It is a very descriptive text, and we were able to connect with our author. Use of introspection and inner monologue, mix of chronological narration and flashback. We saw two flashbacks. Clear and conversational language. This part is majorly important for aspirants who are preparing for PGT exams, and the other two, tone and mood, are generally asked in CBSE exams to evaluate the tone of the text. Sometimes even paragraphs, unseen comprehensions are given to identify the tone. So, being able to identify the tone or the mood of the text that we are already reading helps us to analyze, to understand the tone and the mood of the unseen comprehension. So that is why we discuss the tone and the mood of the of every text that we are going to read. Next, we have literary devices, imagery, like my lungs were ready to burst, and then there are other, you can say, other places where imagery has been used. A lot of, in fact, the entire text has very deep imagery. Personification, terror has seized me. Terror has been given the human quality of seizing someone, which terror being non-human entity cannot, but here it has been personified. Contrast between helplessness and strength. So you can see as a child he was helpless and he gave into fear, but as an adult he gained the strength. So there is contrast. Metaphor, the curtain of life fell. As I told you, it is the metaphor for. You are going to write that in the comments. So let me know the metaphor, the curtain of life fell, is used for what in the story? Alliteration, I flailed at the surface. Simile, like a fish out of water. Okay. And symbolism, water as both a threat and path to liberation. So water here has been used as a symbol for threat when he was drowning, and a path to liberation, to freedom, when he finally learned to swim and he conquered his fears. Finally, let's discuss the main characters. William Douglas is the narrator. He is determined and introspective. We saw how he overcame his fear. Then the big boy, the bully, who is unnamed in the story, who pushes Douglas into the pool. Then the swimming instructor is a very important character of the story who helps Douglas very patiently and with perfection, helps our author to overcome his fear and to be able to swim well. So he's patient, he is methodical teacher. Okay, these explanations can help you write character sketches. So here that is important. Nature and fear also function symbolically as characters. So we saw how nature and fear have been used as symbolic characters. Fear showing, becoming a character that has seized and is holding our author captive. And nature is both dangerous when you are scared of it, and a great friend when you are uh, when you can overcome your fears and you can stay in tandem with nature, you can work with nature. So these are our symbolic characters. Let us now discuss the message or the moral that the story gives, which I have already discussed at length. So let us quickly go through these points and then we will be done with the story. Face your fears head on.
Fear is only as deep as the mind allows. That is the first message that the story gives, that it is only fear. There is only fear, terror and fear. Okay. And when, as soon as you overcome your fear, as soon as you can, you know, face your fears, it will vanish. It will loosen its grip on you. So if you ever feel scared, a lot of children feel scared of exams, a lot of people feel scared of exams. So when you do that, when you are in that situation, you're afraid of writing your exams, look back to the story, think about the story, and face your fears. Because it is only you who will allow those fears to be deep rooted. And it is only you who can take them out and throw them away. Okay? It is not that death that we fear, but the fear of fear itself. That is our second uh, takeaway, very important takeaway, that death is not to be feared. Death has to come to everyone one day, one way or the other. But it is because we are afraid of the way we're going to die. We're afraid of how we're going to die, or the pain that we would have to suffer before dying. That is the fear that roots itself in our hearts, making us afraid of death. So let us not let that fear grab hold and deepen its roots in our hearts. Let us live our life freely. And then finally, it encourages resilience, self discipline, and never giving up. The three very important qualities for a student. You have to be resilient. If you want to achieve something, if you want to achieve your goals, you have to be resilient. You have to be self disciplined. Nobody is going to sit on your head and keep telling you to do this, to study, to prepare, to work for yourself. Nobody is going to do that. So you have to be self disciplined if you have a goal. And finally, never giving up. Never give up on your goals. Never let any fear overcome you. Never let anybody or anything tell you that you're not worth your goals. Set your goals and then set your mind to it that no matter what happens, you're going to achieve your goals.
And that's a deep dive. Well done, explorers. If deep water stirred something in you, whether it's facing your fears or acing your next English test, we've got more where that came from. For daily English boosters, quotes, MCQs, and revision games, join our WhatsApp channels now. Whether you are in class 12, preparing for PGT English, we've got your back. We have these three channels. The links will be provided in the description. Come learn, laugh, and level up with the Eloquent Explorers. Until next time, keep exploring, keep expressing.